All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Enablement Enthusiast Specialist Series. Say that 10 times fast. The purpose of this web series is to shine a light on specialist roles within the enablement community. And for a long time, the sales enablement manager role has sort of stolen the spotlight. But as sales has evolved, so has the enablement function. And so as we expand into this world of revenue enablement, I want to explore what other roles exist. How do they add value to their organizations? How do they carve out this new frontier and build clarity around their responsibilities? How do we measure success? And you'll learn all that and more through Enablement Enthusiast Specialist Series. And to kick it all off, I am so excited for this high-level chat with one of my favorite people, Dave Lichtman from Enablematch. Dave and I met in Manhattan at a Sales Enablement Society event. And we just stayed after the event and chatted for, I think, hours about our passion for the industry. So Dave, so excited to join us. Maybe give us a brief introduction about your background and what you're doing now.
Yeah, happy to. And it's so good to talk to you. And you are one of my favorite people as well. And I love sharing enablement stories with people who also like to nerd out on enablement. But I've been in and around enablement for a long time now. So in a lifetime ago, I was actually a sales enablement practitioner, a trainer as we called it back then. And then 2 years ago this week, I launched Enablematch. And Enablematch is basically a recruiting firm for sales enablement folks. I help people in sales enablement find jobs and help companies find people. That's all I do. But I spent a lot of years in sales training, then sales management, and then a sales technology company, sales enablement technology company. So I come to this conversation in this space from a lot of different angles, and it is my passion, is what I love to do. And so doing what I do, I get to work with great people every day, and I feel like I have the best job. But it's been really fun watching, as you said before, this space grow and evolve and burgeon while we're here at the forefront. And so, yeah, it's super good to be here and talk about one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting when we talk about this evolution, but I'm curious, you've been in this field for a while. What do you think was the genesis of enablement, and how have you seen it evolve?
Yeah, and it's, to be clear, it's been around forever in different forms, right? So back when I did it, it was a fairly narrowly defined thing of sales training. And I was classroom based. I would get up there and I would train, and I would check a box and people would fill out surveys, and I did a great job, and that was it. And a lot's happened since then, right? And enablement has evolved immensely. And now you see things you never saw before. You see better alignment with the sales organization. You see metrics being tied to what we do as enablement folks. You see a broader purview of things, which we'll talk about in a second, but you see a broader and growing responsibility. And why do why has it evolved, you asked? I guess the thing I've observed the most is when SaaS really started to explode, enablement really took on. Because you think about it, if you're selling, I was thinking like the office solutions, but like if you're selling paper, then that didn't evolve very much. So the need to do new product training didn't happen that often. But with SaaS, with 3 or 4 or even sometimes 12 releases per year, the need to keep enabling your folks on how to train this new stuff gets higher and higher and higher. And the barrier for more competitors coming in there gets lower and lower and lower because they can start a company. And so the need to be more agile and develop trainings and think about things differently and competitive stuff, it's gotten exponentially greater than it was before this whole SaaS thing happened. So my sort of layman's view is when SaaS really took off, that increased the need for something more agile. And that's when I think enablement really took off. And I think it's met its need, right? I think enablement has really kind of by necessity gotten to be this really multi-headed thing that helps these sales organizations do what they need to do. But it's a far cry from what I did, 20 years ago as a sales trainer, because like I wasn't tied to metrics, and I wasn't as ingrained with the sales team as I should be. My bonus wasn't tied to sales performance. All these things that we do now that we didn't do then. It's evolved so much, and it's been so amazing to see.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring up that like SaaS was a big proponent for this push into enablement, because not only is it all of the product innovation, but also like the customer retention side, that emphasis on annual recurring revenue with these subscription models. Yeah, I totally see that. Another thing that's really fascinating for me, and we talked a little bit about this in the past, is how every company defines enablement differently. Do you have like your definition of enablement? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's funny. I always joke about this. I think we've spoke about this before, like you said. Like I always leave this to the academics because I feel like people spend a lot of time trying to define it, which is it's a valiant thing to do. But I think the reality is there is and will be no agreed upon definition. So my shorthand is just the following. It's just a group of activities that you do that drives more revenue and makes driving revenue easier. And I just kind of stop at that because that's an umbrella, right? Like I think of it as a panoply of activities. So as you said before, it might have to do with content. It might have to do with actual in classroom training. It might have to do with coaching. It might have to do with getting content on the opportunity page in salesforce.com. Like there's all these things and facets that go with it that are in my broader umbrella of helping you sell more easily. And so I don't have a quick, alliteration and it's this, and this that come together. I don't have that. I just say we drive revenue and we help it make it easier for the sellers. Because at the end of the day, we want predictability, we want repeatability, and we're trying to get all the friction out of the process. That's what we do. And to your point, you said it perfectly, is it varies company by company. In certain companies, might have friction in this part of the process. So my job as an enablement person in this company could be vastly different from mine at that company. And so I like the broader definition only because it is, yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard the analogy of like, a goldfish grows to the size of its bowl. I feel like enablement, it grows to the size of the bowl we need in the company that we're in.
That's so true. And I think that what I'm hearing, the way you describe it, it's more outcomes focused versus the actual tactical things that enablement does. And when you ask, like, when I join a new company, one of the first things I do is like this level setting exercise of understanding how do the individual frontline managers and the staff define enablement. And you often hear like training, onboarding, and those things are actually shared and scaled responsibilities, right? Like managers will always be ultimately accountable for some of the onboarding, but where enablement comes in, it's like we'll come with a strategy on how to decrease ramp time, right? So I love that you're focused more on like the outcome side of it. What do you see as, Enablematch being the first staffing firm for enablement? Like, what do you see as some of the most current like hiring trends at the moment?
Yeah, there's it's funny. So COVID obviously has been an interesting part of it this year. I will say the following, enablement has been increasing in importance for the past 10 plus years, probably 15 years now, and COVID's been an interesting pause. And then I think what this year has done is it helped people realize that people have to change how they sell, right? Most companies out there's been a pivot to their playbook of how they sell. Like I have one of my clients, they said to me a couple of weeks ago, we used to sell over steak dinners. That was sort of our MO.
Yeah, field sales.
They can't do that right now. And
Yeah.
so their playbook for selling has changed. And now how do you get an entire field who's been selling like that for so many years to now all of a sudden pivot? And that's where enablement comes in. And so that's my way of saying the relative import of what we do has increased this year as we've kind of gotten our arms around, all right, we know how to work within COVID, and now there's eyes on post-COVID, but we're selling differently. We're needed more than ever to help our sellers adapt to selling in this virtual, new environment with our new playbooks in a way that we haven't before. So I think there's increased importance on we got to pivot, but then I'm also seeing a lot of emphasis on the leaders, and one of the biggest things is getting the sales enablement leader role right. And as you well know, a lot of companies will spend a long time waiting to find the right person, 9 months, even up to a year sometimes, to get it right. And it heartens me that they're not just taking the next warm body who comes in the door They know they know the strategic nature of the role like never before, and they're going to wait to get it right. And that is something that you wouldn't have before. And even last year and even into this year, at least once a month or so, I'll hear some version of the phrase that some CEO or CRO will say that this sales enablement hire is the most important hire they're going to have this year. And that would have never happened, 10 plus years ago, because it wasn't thought of as strategic. And so as I think of how it's evolved from tactical to strategic, from these little things to these big things. Like there was a person I work with, she was telling me this a couple weeks ago about how she essentially had become her CRO's de facto chief of staff. Mm-hmm. Every strategic initiative that he had, he pulled her in on those conversations. Any problem with the sales or the pipeline, what's going on, he pulled her in, and he was her essential chief of staff. Mm-hmm. And that is a far cry from how I think when I did the job and how I think people thought of the job even 10 plus years ago. And so I think there is this evolution towards strategic that is heartening and amazing to see.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think that, you have to establish credibility and build that reputation. What do you think are some of the tactics or skills required to bridge that gap from being tactical into strategic and shifting the perception of the function in that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a tricky thing. And I feel like I'll start off by saying this. Some people have it in their DNA, mm-hmm. and just to do this naturally, and it's just easy for them. Other folks, it's a mindful thing to be this way, and it's not natural, but they can do it. So that's my caveat.
Yeah.
So I think to really shift from tactical to strategic, I think first of all, it takes, I think, having just the gravitas and finding your voice. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is if you're not invited to that meeting on Mondays with a CRO or VP of sales and his or her direct reports, can you invite yourself to that meeting? Can you say, hey, Whitney, I know you have your Monday morning with your directs. I would really like to be a part of that meeting. And because I think I want to know what's going on. I think I can add some value. But again, it's finding the voice to, if you're not at the table, literally or figuratively, then finding the voice to get yourself at that table.
Yeah.
And then once you're at that table, again, literally or metaphorically,
sure.
You having the ability to always have something to say and always offer the input and ask questions and speak up. And again, this is what I was saying before. It's not in everyone's nature to always speak up, but you have to find your voice, because if you don't have a voice, you're not going to earn that respect, and it's just not going to happen. If you're at a meeting, you don't say anything, you're not going to be invited back next time because you've added no value. You just took up a seat at the table and added no value. And along those same lines, I think finding people who have the ability to disagree. Mm-hmm. And I value this so much, and I talk about this a lot with people individually, that having the ability to say, you, Whitney, as a CRO, you have a really good idea, but I might disagree with you, and you're my boss, but I still might disagree with you, and we're going to have a discussion and have a healthy debate. But that's not easy for everybody to disagree with their boss or disagree with a CRO or a CEO. But to find your voice and to gain the respect, you need to be able to disagree sometimes when you have a point of view, and do it very respectfully and tactfully.
Sure.
But that's important, because otherwise you become just a rubber stamp or a yes person, and you haven't added the value and earned their respect. And I think there's a time where you've got to find that voice and speak up. And I'm talking in generalities, but I think this is where the gold lies, of just whatever that may be, whether it's tactically on how to do something, mm-hmm. or what to focus on, or what you're hearing in the field. But the ability to speak truth to power, as the cliche goes, is really real here. And a lot of enablement folks struggle with that. And they just smile and nod their head and say, okay, I'll go do that. And they don't stop to ask why. They don't stop to say, like, hey, have you considered this? And to become strategic, to become important, to become invaluable and like a default chief of staff, you've got to be that person, because then all of a sudden your stock goes up. And when they have a really hard problem, they come to you for your input. I'll start there.
Isn't that funny? I feel like you're right. There's this mantra around enablement where you've got to have the entrepreneurial spirit because you are carving out something new within a business. And then you also have to have this philanthropic mindset. But that doesn't mean saying yes to everything. And so I think because we'll always balance like that tactical and strategic, initiatives, but you're right, coming with a point of view is really important there. So we're talking a lot about like the value of the leader role. And one of the big things for a leader role at a growing organization is how do you build the vision to grow your team? And there's a lot of options, right? Enablement's defined differently, so teams get defined differently. We're not at any sort of like industry standard similar to like how the sales function has it.
Sure.
What do you see as like some of these specialist roles that are starting to emerge in the industry?
Yeah, and it's great that this whole podcast series is about these specialist roles, because they are evolving and they will continue to evolve. And I think, I guess if you think about and track the evolution, first we're all program managers. You handled a program or a portfolio of programs. And then I think that the natural evolution from there is, all right, let's have some segmentation. So I'm enabling the enterprise reps, you're doing mid-market reps, somebody's doing the SDRs. There's sort of like this, you're having some segmentation because the needs are different from an inside sales rep versus enterprise rep. So there's nuances there. Mm-hmm. Then we get into like industry specific. So I'm kind of a bigger company, I'm doing healthcare or I'm doing financial services. So you're having different things because the customer stories, the case studies, those are all different. The value props are different based on those industries. So there's all of a sudden some nuance there, where when you get into bigger companies, it gets even more interesting and even more granular. You see things like sales enablement analytics. Mm-hmm. Or things like that, where it's like things in a small company you don't have the luxury of having. You see a lot of people who are like content specialists or in e-learning or otherwise, or content strategists, where you might come from a content background or an adult learning background. And so you're thinking about how do people absorb content. That's how you view the world. And that's how everything that they put out from a content perspective goes through your lens. And so there's those roles. My absolute favorite role in the world, if I can share, is the role of like manager coach. So your entire job is to coach managers. Like that, talk about bang for the buck in terms of where to invest a few dollars. Like that role, if you have a lot of managers, you have uneven performance of managers, that's a huge ROI if you can get that thing fixed. And so that's my absolute favorite role in the world, from an enablement perspective, just because it's niche, but it's so powerful if you have the luxury of having that. That's my favorite one. The other one that I see emerging a lot, just because of where we are, is the idea of like sales enablement technology admin or specialist, whatever you call it. But there's so many. The enablement stack is so deep now that somebody who's the admin or in charge of all those systems is a role that's emerged. Again, back when I did the role, there was an enablement stack. So all these things that they pop up by necessity, mm-hmm. But again, those are the ones I see popping up that are interesting.
I love that. And the manager enablement role in particular, I think that's fascinating because that amplifies that multiplier effect that enablement has in general. But if you're able to enable the frontline managers, that's like the most important partnership for helping it stick at the staff level too. So
that's scale, that's leverage, and that's how you get especially for a bigger organization. If you can fix the uneven performance of your managers, that fixes the uneven performance of all their reps. That's scale. That's bang for the buck.
Yeah, and isn't it funny that like some companies don't invest in that, right? Like they'll focus on onboarding for staff, but no manager onboarding. And so it only furthers those like tribal behaviors. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent because you got me on a hot topic.
No, but I will say, just since we're on that tangent, I mean, yeah. I think part of the challenge we see a lot, especially in fast growing companies, is you take this very successful rep and he or she now says, all right, you're a manager because you were really good. But the skill set of a manager and the skill set of a rep are vastly different.
Yeah.
And if you're a first-time manager, somebody needs to teach you the ropes of being a manager, or else you become that super rep who tries to be on every call, on every deal, and that just doesn't scale. That's when the system things start to break, because you can't be on 10 reps deals all day long. It just doesn't work. And so that's where I think enabling the managers properly of how to work with the team, different skill set. And it's one, to your point, it's rarely done and sorely needed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so all these different options exist. What type of advice would you give to a leader that's building their team? Like, how do they make the decision and prioritize one role over another? What are your thoughts on that strategy?
Yeah, it's a really hard one, actually, just because a lot of it is on putting out fire. So for example, if you're in a really fast growing company and you're onboarding a ton of people over the next 12 to 24 months, clearly an onboarding and delivery person is really important, right? You just need somebody who, if you're doing a new class, a new cohort every week or every month, like and that's a week each time.
Yeah.
That's all becomes a full-time job, just because, and that's sort of a necessity, because that's all you can do if you're doing that much delivery. And so I would say you kind of put that fire out so that you can then invest in things that are broader reaching, more strategic. But I always view the world as, it starts with somebody, with the portfolio of programs. What programs do you run versus I run? We kind of divide up the pie that way. And then just that's how I start. And then as there is a specific need, you can hire for that. So for example, if we're all remote now and you got to do a lot of content delivery over an LMS type of tool, maybe an e-learning specialist who can pump out content nonstop for the field, that might be the right next hire. In my own narrow view of the world is, I think that's after you have enough people who own programs. That's a little bit later. But I think I always start with the basics, get all your bases covered, and then you start to think about, all right, what's the specialist role I need right now, whether it's delivery, whether it's e-learning, whether it's coaching, like that's, or even getting into a specific industry. I think that's sort of like that next step. That's like the 2.0 of your org chart. But only do that once you have all your fundamental bases covered. I think sometimes some people will kind of hire that specialist role too early when they need more of a generalist right now. And so I think it's just making sure you have the generalist bases covered before you get into specialist roles.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, let's flip the script a little bit, right? We're talking more about like the leader and the strategy side. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like people coming into these roles, people that are applying for these roles, people that are breaking into enablement.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone who's trying to move into this function?
Yeah, a lot of things. So I think first and foremost, if you're from the outside, first leverage your background. So for example, if you have spent 20 years selling in IT security space, then maybe find a job enabling IT security people. That's actually how I got my first enablement job. So not in security, but I spent a bunch of years as a buyer in the retail space. And so when I found this retail technology company who had all these sellers who knew nothing about retail, and I did. So I brought the domain expertise to the conversation for all the reps, and I educated them on their space and on their customers and their customers' pains. I had no experience in enablement or training, but I brought the domain. And so if there's a background that you can leverage, it's a great thing as an expert in a certain industry, and that you can help enable people who don't have that background. So there's that angle. If you're a marketer and really good at content, that's a natural point that you can take those skills as a content expert and leverage them on the enablement team. Because sometimes enablement team ends up doing a lot of content creation. And so there are a lot of roles where it's a content heavy role. So I think if a marketer, you can go there. Again, if you're a VP of sales for 10 plus years, you want to hang up the bag because you got too many gray hairs, that's that manager coaching role or the rep coaching role is a very natural way to get in, because you've been doing this job. You've been coaching reps and coaching managers for 10, 20 years. It's a natural thing. So I always say, first, leverage your background as much as you can. That's number one. I think number two is there is a tendency when you're on the outside to think about enablement with just generalities. Oh, I train people, I get them to sell more. And you're just thinking broad strokes. And if you were to go into an interview situation and you're talking broad strokes, you're dead in the water. Like you're not going to get very far. You have to demonstrate a proficiency on the topic. And that proficiency is shown by some specificity in how you're describing the job. And so what I mean is, if I say, hey, Whitney, so you spend 10 years in sales, you want to get into enablement. What do you think makes a good enablement program versus a bad one? You need to have a point of view on things like that and answer with specificity. Well, Dave, since you asked, I found that whenever enablement programs went to the managers first and they had input on the content, and then we did a dry run with them first, then they got their team to go do it. Like there's things you're going to talk about that with specificity that shows you understand the job. Where I say, hey, Whitney, what are the biggest challenges do you think of being an enablement leader? And again, if you're kind of like a deer in the headlights, you're not going to get very far versus like, honestly, executive engagement or getting reps bandwidth, getting them to pay attention or whatever those things are, but an understanding of the specifics and the challenges of the role, it's really important. So to do that, what I say is there are a lot of great books out there. Pick a couple of them and read them. There are podcasts out there. Listen to them. There's a Udemy course out there. Go there. But you need to go into these conversations with a point of view and with specifics and draw from your experience and weave it into a narrative. But if you don't have a point of view and you're just like, I want to come train your people because I sold, therefore I can train, that doesn't cut it. And so those are the things I think about first and foremost when I'm coaching people is you've got to have the vernacular, you got to have the mastery of the topic. And if you don't, it's very hard to convince somebody to take a chance on you.
Yeah. So being curious and learning as much about the role as you can if you haven't been in it before. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And so that leads me to like one of my last questions before we wrap up is, right now, Dave, you're an expert in this field. You talk to people in this field all the time. What advice would you have given yourself knowing that you were an early practitioner of enablement?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll answer this question in an indirect way.
Sure.
One of the things I observed from talking to all these enablement folks out there, the two things that people get wrong a lot, and like people lose their jobs in enablement a decent amount of time for a variety of reasons. And when I peel back the onion on why people have been unsuccessful or lost their jobs, 9 times out of 10 is because they didn't build deep enough relationships or enough relationships. And this is a relationship business. It's a team sport. And
the most collaborative function.
Absolutely. And people will win or die by their ability to collaborate. And so I think that's one thing. The second thing is people aren't metric driven enough. And people, when they get into interview situations, they're not talking about why they're running their programs from a metrics point of view. They're not grounding their programs and thinking it from that lens. So when you ask me what I would do 20 years ago when I was a practitioner, I was good. I was employee of the year. Everyone loved me. That was all great. But I did the job all wrong. I absolutely fundamentally did the job wrong. We didn't ground our programs in the right metrics. We weren't judging it that way. And I wasn't embedded enough with the field. I didn't force myself in these conversations. I didn't do enough ride-alongs. I didn't sit on demos. I didn't do all the things that I probably should have done to stay really embedded with the field. At the time, I had never sold before. And I sort of from afar understood sales, or I thought I did. And then I got into sales and realized I didn't know a darn thing about it. But like, I really wasn't a student of sales like I should have been. And so again, I wish I had been a student of sales. I wish I had been building better relationships. And I wish I had the lens through which to look at my programs critically. And I didn't. I was all about the smiley faces. And I will tell anybody who's interviewing in 2020 and beyond, you've got to have those things, A, for interviewing purposes, but also to be successful. And so again, if you're breaking into enablement, I would take those to heart, think about that in a deep way of how do you view the world this way? And like every program you build needs to have a why behind it. And a lot of folks still struggle with having a why for every program that they do.
That's great advice. And I feel like it couples really well with some knowledge you dropped earlier around being reactive, right? You don't get out of this like rat race of chasing these projects. And so you don't find the time to actually demonstrate your impact. So it's a double whammy there that holds the people back. Dave, thank you so much for your time today. Are there any parting advice or words that you want to share with the community?
I will just say there has never been a better time to be in sales enablement. We are increasingly strategic. We're increasingly well paid. The pay scale continues to go up for enablement, which is a great thing to see. And so it's a great time, but it is you got to work at it. It is a job where you have to think with a high EQ and be smart, build relationships, and if you do it right and you pick a company that values enablement, you'll have the best job in the company.
Awesome. Dave Lichtman, thank you so much for joining us and participating in the kickoff for Enablement Enthusiast Specialist Series. Each conversation will dive deeper into the roles that we talked about today, from CS enablement, content specialist, manager enablement, onboarding managers, the works. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about this industry together. All right, Dave, thank you again.